So this is our 2023 Chang Li that got delivered and fell apart on the transport. And in this video, I'm gonna go through and fix everything that went wrong so we can get this thing running and driving. So I got the Chang Li inside and I got the back tipped up. We're gonna go ahead and get all these batteries pulled out of here and see what I have to do to get the battery trays straightened out so we can get these batteries to sit flat. I also noticed back here we got wires getting dug into. The controller itself is not held in except for with one screw on this side. The other three are falling out. Yeah, we're gonna go through and get all this stuff straightened out, fix that smashed wire, and yeah, find some screws for the door. So let's get started. Okay, to start here, I got my switch shut off and disconnected my lead that actually got ripped out before. It's just going to show you this here. So we got some arcing on the wires here that this must have shorted out against something once upon a time. But look at how crappy they did the wiring. So this is the ground that they have running off of this terminal on the pump motor, which goes into this light gauge wire up to this heavy gauge wire. And that is the actual ground for the controller. They ran it into this tape mess and connected it to the hydraulic pump motor and then ran it to this wire, which runs all the way up to the front in here to this tape mess where they got two light gauge wires coming off of a full 4-gauge battery cable. Yeah, I don't know a lot about electric vehicles, but whoever built this doesn't know a lot about electricity or the proper way to run circuitry. So I'm going to upgrade a lot of this by the time we're done, but we're going to go ahead and get these batteries pulled out of there so we can get this fixed. Here's another thing I'd point out really quick. I put the strap around here to kind of hold the bottom of the battery when I realized that this is a positive terminal. If this battery would have slipped down another inch or so and get it in here, that would have hit the frame right there, and that probably would have burned this whole thing down. So I got all the batteries stripped out of it, and I gotta say those batteries probably weigh as much as this entire truck does from the metal that I've lifted. However, this brake cable is probably the only thing that saved these batteries from shorting out, because the only reason that this whole piece of metal didn't come out the bottom was the emergency brake cable was actually holding it in. So yeah, had that cable not been there, this probably would have shorted out and completely burned the truck down. So anyway, here's some of the wiring wonders that they did with this. So we have a roughly 4-gauge battery cable on the positive side. This would be the 60-volt positive lead. Drops down to like a 10-gauge or so, maybe 8, that runs to the electrical circuit breaker. And then we're down to this wire, which this is probably like a 12-gauge wire that runs up to the solenoid. And then it drops down into this, I don't know, 20-gauge wire. And throughout this entire thing, there's no fuses anywhere. So I'm not sure, but pretty sure if you use higher voltage, you still have to run a fuse in order to have circuit protection. So I'm gonna get rid of whatever this is and probably add some kind of a circuit breaker or fuses in here just for some safety. But maybe that's why electric vehicles start on fire, because the guys who are building them wire them without fuses, just perhaps. But yeah, this is the ground side. You can see here they got tape wrapped around a bolt going through 2 eyelets of wire. And we got kind of the same deal going on here. This is a really thin, probably 14 gauge to like a 12 gauge into what is probably a 10 gauge. And that goes into the controller. Now, pretty sure this is an AC 3-phase controller, so I don't know how much current actually runs through the DC side. But yeah, you still don't wire things like this. At least I don't. because the ground side in here is the exact same way. They got a 4-gauge cable going into like a 10, and then this is that like 12 gauge. So, and here's that e-brake cable. Generic. Alright, I got a lot of fixing to do here. Well, I went ahead and instead of drilling out the spot welds to this tin foil, I just shook it a couple times and it broke right off. So this is the metal that they use as the battery tray. It's like half a pound. I think I'm gonna weigh it later. All right, so I went ahead and I got rid of all the old floor. Generic tin. This stuff is so thin. I mean, it's literally so flimsy. You can just mold it with your hand. I mean, it's the weakest metal. So, instead of using this garbage, which is literally garbage because it's all distorted and bent up, and the part where it was mounted to down here, this is even bent. I don't know if I get a good angle on it down here, maybe. There you go. You can see this angle iron's all bent and dropped out too. So even the angle iron they used was paper thin. This stuff is like, you can twist it with your hand. It just twists. It's so weak. So what I'm gonna do, instead of using sheet metal floor, I'm just gonna make 2 angle iron boxes for the batteries out of a little bit thicker angle iron and get them welded into the square tubing, and this should work great. All right, so we got the Chang Li in here, and I thought this would be a great demonstration just to show you how small and how lightweight these trucks are. So you can literally pick it up by yourself. So pretty lightweight vehicles. Granted, it doesn't have the batteries in it, but I think the actual curb weight of the entire truck is 500 pounds without the batteries. So kind of funny, but anyway, what we have here is the batteries are out, and I went down and I picked myself up some angle iron, and we're going to use the angle iron to make some new battery trays so that this thing can actually be driven and the batteries don't fall out the bottom when you hit a bump. So I got my first tray welded up here. We're going to go ahead and test fit it in the vehicle once it cools because it's still pretty hot, and then we'll put mounts on each side so we can have a hold down. But I made a 3 battery tray for the 3 that way, and then I'm going to make a 2 battery tray so that way I can put them in here all underneath the box instead of under the floor. And I'm going to put 3 across this way, and then I'm going to put 2 this way, and they should all fit right there. It'll be much easier to service. I'll be able to fix a lot of the stupid wiring the way they have this. Yeah, we're going to get it all fixed. So I went ahead and hit it with some industrial enamel, just white because it doesn't really matter. It's going to be underneath it. I had some tractor enamel paint here, so should hold up, and the thickness of this metal is twice as thick as the truck's metal, so it should last probably longer than the truck. So here's a really good example of some of the wiring I'm going to redo. So you can see this wire here, and you can actually see that it's rubbed through right there. And you can actually, there's a bolt holding these 2 wires together. Well, this is a heavier gauge wire than this, and they have this little piece of wire here. Instead of running this wire this direction right to it and getting rid of this piece of wire, they decided to add a jumper with electrical tape around it. So that's kind of the wiring that I'm going to redo and redesign, so this is a lot cleaner and a lot safer. So I've got my new angle iron battery trays mounted in and welded in place, nice and sturdy. It has all the batteries right underneath the bed of the truck instead of being underneath the cab, so you had to take out the seat. Should be just enough clearance to fit everything here, and this should work really well. So I'm going to go ahead and get these all wired back together, and like I said, I'm going to go ahead and rewire basically the whole truck. I don't like the way this looks. I think this is kind of a crappy way of making a junction block of wires, and so I'm going to fix a lot of that stuff and make it look a lot better. So one of the ways that I'm going to simplify the wiring is I now have, this is my negative and that's my positive 60 volts. So this was the positive lead. This connected to the battery, and then this ran into the circuit breaker to shut off the electric motor, and this ran to the electric hydraulic pump, which also splices into some of the electronics up front. I'm going to take apart this tape mess and be able to wire it straight to the positive side of the battery, and then do the same thing with the ground wire, which will end up right on this terminal here, so, or the negative side of the 60 volt system. So should work really well and be nice and contained, and the battery shouldn't go anywhere. I got a brace that I'm going to put across the top to hold them down, and should be like brand new. All right, so what I've gone ahead and done is reconfigured the mounting of the batteries. I got 3 this way, 2 that way. I have it set up so this is my main positive and this is my main negative, and instead of having the main positive and negative running to those balls of tape where they had the wires all going together, I rerouted the controller ground over to the motor where it was, got rid of that extra extension, ran 4 gauge directly to the motor terminal for both this DC, or for both this motor and for the controller for the electric motor. Went ahead and ran the power feed to the fuse block. Instead of having it go to the 4 gauge into this wire, I ran this gauge directly to the fuse block and got rid of the 4 gauge wire, and this wire is running directly to the pump motor. So much simpler, much cleaner. Everything's mounted down. We have battery hold down so they can't fall out again. Used angle iron instead of tin foil for a battery tray. I went ahead and put 4 bolts instead of self-tapping screws in the motor controller because this was all loose. And for whatever this component is, I think it has something to do with either the backup camera or the rear sensors. I'm not sure, but this was laying loose and just had double-sided tape holding it on in the first place. So I drilled a couple holes and ran a zip tie around it. It's gonna be much, much more secure. Obviously, I got my hydraulic cylinder hooked back in. So now we have a hydraulic dump bed, and yeah, batteries aren't moving. Everything's mounted good and solid. All I have left to do now is the driver's side seat is still not connected, and I got to figure out what I'm going to do about this door latch. When the bolts fell out, the latch itself internally fell apart, and so I'm going to have to take the door apart to get it fixed. Hopefully I can just repair it and we don't have to get a part, but I can see a spring popped out, and so I don't know exactly what I have to do with that. And so this is the actual door latch. I took it apart, and not only did it fall off the door, but the latch itself completely fell apart and all the internals came apart. I hope I can figure out how to get it all put back together and work again, because I don't know where we're going to find parts. Not fun. Well, I put it all back together and realized that this piece needs to be spring loaded, and the spring that was right here had to have fallen out through the hole in the bottom of the door, because I have no idea where it's at. I took apart a pen and I got this spring, and I gotta say, it's pretty close. I think it's gonna work. I'm gonna put it back together with the spring out of a pen. I stretched it out a little bit more, just put a little bit of extra tension on it, but hopefully this fixes my door latch. I have to say, I now have a door that closes and opens. Awesome. Well, here it is. I finally got the Chang Li all put back together. We are not going to put the front brush guard back on. This metal's way too thin to weld, and he decided just to leave that off. Doors fixed, wiring's fixed, the hydraulic bed works. Vehicle's basically back to where it is, or where it should have been when it got here. I think it's time to take it for a little drive and see how bad or good this thing actually drives. So we are going to take our Chang Li for a little test drive. Again, that beeper is so annoying. Shut my garage here. All right. Makes a lot of noises in the suspension already. It's pretty creaky. Brakes are kind of grindy too, but that's probably just a little bit of rust on the rotors. We're going forward. Oh, and I thought this was kind of funny. So this looks like a radio, but it's not. It's a TV screen for the reverse camera. It's got a volume, but there's no actual radio. It doesn't do anything. You can't, it's not a touch screen. It does have a USB up here. I assume that's just for charging your phone. No idea. We must be in low gear because we're not hardly going anywhere. Okay, there we go. Ooh, it is very bumpy and rattly. I'm gonna cruise down through this parking lot here. Yeah, the suspension's terrible. 47 kilometers. It doesn't stop very well. Or turn very sharp. For a tiny little vehicle. So it got up to 47 kilometers. We'll have to I guess the alignment's not as bad as I thought it was. It just wanders. We only made it up to 45 that way, so I don't know how fully charged the battery is. It's at 60.7. But when I'm floored, it's only at 55.8. So the battery might not be. Wow, it feels like I'm gonna tip over. Yeah, ride's pretty rough. Oh, the alignment is pretty off. I think there's a bunch of looseness in it. Well, so that was my little test drive in the EV. Yeah, it only got up to 47 kilometers, which is about 30 miles an hour, a little over that. Doesn't feel super stable. My seat is bolted in now, but the metal door that it's attached to is that loose, and so the whole floor that the seat attaches to kind of wanders around. There's not really much cushion in the seat at all. So here's a small quality control note. Well, what? Okay, well, tailgate doesn't open real well. Am I staying on this or is it gonna tip? All right, so you see all this rust on top of this? I was looking at it and I thought that was kind of weird. And there's like a rust strip here. Huh. Well, it turns out this upper bar is only just tack welded in a couple spots and it's open across the top. And so rainwater is getting inside of this bar, filling it up into the front, and then when you go to take off or you tip it back, the rainwater is then dripping liquid rust. As you can see right here, my finger is wet, onto the bed and making rust stains because the entire roll bar is filled with water. Well, with all the issues we found, the Chang Li is finally finished and ready to be picked up. My buddy who owns it's gonna come and drive it around for a little while and see what he thinks of his new toy. Not sure what we're gonna do with it after this, but if it comes back to the channel, we'll have another video on it. But as of right now, it's a running, driving Chinese Chang Li EV. So Gonna give it back to him. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.